So what I want to do with you this morning is describe the socioeconomic profile of Jesus' day. You were talking a little bit about that. What about the middle class? Vinny brought it up for Mark. Is there any middle class in this ancient world? There is in our world. What was life like in the Galilee of one common era? In order to do that, let's create a chart. We'll begin with two axes. The vertical axis shows prestige, privilege, and power. The higher you go, the more prestige, the more privilege, and the more power you have. So people in that chimney stack, how much privilege, power, and honor do you think those people have? Power they have? A lot. Remember that chimney stack, folks. Higher in the axis, the more of these goods we have available. The horizontal axis on the bottom represents population. The wider, the more population. The more narrow, the few. So the wider the graph, greater population, more narrow the graph, less. Inserting this graphic demonstrates at its widest point many people living, but at the narrow chimney top only very, very few very powerful people. This society is clearly one that is vertical, because there is a lot more people at the bottom than at the top. What we want to do is to locate in the chart the people that are talked about in this parable and Jesus. How's that sound? We're going to locate where our blessed Lord fits into this socioeconomic model. Let's start with the top. As Mel Brooks says, it's good to be the king. The top of the chimney stack is our starting point in order to see this. This is the top of the social order, folks, where power, prestige, and privilege abound, but limited in availability to only 1 to 2% of the total population. 1 to 2%, the narrow. At the very, very top of this chart, the height of all the power, prestige, and privilege would be the king, Herod the Great and his sons the Tetrarchs, and the procurator Pontius Pilate. In other words, the local ruler. This very top position would obviously include the royal family, especially key members of it, the Herodians, but it also includes various religious political groups. Herod the Great. By the way, does Herod the Great in that statue look like the way he's portrayed in every movie? Like a Jewish caricature? What does he look like? Like a Greco Roman, exactly. You know that he would not have spoken Hebrew, and Aramaic would have been difficult for him? Would have spoke Greek mostly, most comfortable. Here's Herod the Great's Jerusalem palace. A model of it. So the great family that controlled everything are the Herodians. A family, and that part of the first century Judean elite that was basically in bed with the Romans. They were Roman puppets. The power of the Herodian family derived from the fact that they were the clients of the Roman world, and they looked to the Rome and its emperor as their patron, their patron. They wielded enormous power and prestige. They controlled the coinage. They controlled the temple. The Herodians lived as Greco Roman elites. They dressed the way the Romans did. They spoke the way the Romans did. Many knowing some Latin, but all spoke Greek, and almost none of them spoke a word of Hebrew, with only a few speaking Aramaic well.
But they were Jews, though, is that right, Bill?
The Herodians were actually, they had become Judean in practice, not really. They were Greco Roman elites. They were originally of descent from Idumea, the Edomites, who lived south of Judea. And that's a long story, but basically they were forced to convert to Judean practices when John Hyrcanus went down there and basically forced circumcised their Herod the Great's grandfather, I believe. That must have been real fun. By the way, circumcision at this time was only a nick. It was not the full removal, circumcision of the foreskin. What wonderful things you learn at Bible Alive. In the medieval church, they had 4 churches that were dedicated to the relic of the foreskin of Jesus. He never had his foreskin removed, folks. It was a nick. They didn't start doing full removal of the foreskin until the times of Bar Kokhba, the Bar Kokhba revolt. You know, in Maccabees it says you can cosmetically hide the mark of circumcision. You can't do that with an all-around cut. And besides, who's going to get close enough to look anyway? All right, here we go.
What was the point? Biblically speaking, what was that?
It's a sign of a covenant with Abraham.
Okay.
It was practiced at different times, in different ways, but it was never something that was popularized until the time of the Maccabean revolt. The real purpose of it was, see, in the first century, right? Without that mark of circumcision, many people living in the Mediterranean world, how could you distinguish them from the peoples they lived around, the other Mediterraneans? So it was a sign of distinction, among other things, certain things like dietary habit and other things. This is. And when they did Greco-Roman wrestling, how did they do that? Or when, like, Peter is fishing, do you think he was in bathing trunks? Their customs are not our customs. It was different. One of the ways you showed that was having certain marker characteristics. But the marker characteristic was just like a little nick. Later on, it was called what we translate as circumcision. Just like synagogue. They go to synagogue, but synagogue was not a place of worship in the first century, only the temple.
Right.
It was a place where guys go to hang out, Israelite guys, and they cuss, spit, and talk politics, the Torah, get angry, and get into fights, like guys do everywhere. But by the 2nd century, it became the place of worship because there's no temple anymore. So synagogue takes on a new meaning. I could go through about 13 other things that'll show you, wait a minute, Jews, 500 CE, and Judeans, related, evolved, but not the same thing.
So, excuse me, the temple and the synagogue was 2 different buildings?
Oh, yeah.
So the
Synagogues were in the 1st century like YMCA for Israelites, males.
Okay. And the temple?
2nd century, 3rd century, they're places of worship for domestic Israelite religion, becoming Judaism as we know it. Judaism practices of the 2nd temple period, the only place of worship is the temple, and it's political religion. The temple is political religion, not domestic.
Theocracy?
In lieu of, in the aim of that. Supposed to be, but was failing. Because look, who was controlling it? Not God, not theocracy, the Roman puppets. Herodians, who dressed the way Romans did, spoke the way Romans did, many knowing some Latin, but all spoke Greek, and almost none of them spoke a word of Hebrew, and only very few spoke Aramaic well. For most Herodians, the everyday language was Greek. Their manners were Macedonian and Athenian, dressing and eating and speaking in Hellenic fashion, politically, philosophically, theologically, oh Mike. And socially, they were in bed with the occupying power, the Roman Empire. So would you call them, I wouldn't call any of these people Jews, including Jesus. Judeans, Galilean Judeans. Would it shock you to say I don't find too many Christians, Jews, or Muslims in the New Testament? How many do I find here? 0. You find anybody professing the Nicene Constantinopolitan Creed in the New Testament times, in those Jesus groups? Okay. Vocabulary is important. Christian in the first century is a slur, like the N-word. 300 years later, 325, it's become an honorific via Constantine. Things change. Whenever you move the language, you necessarily change the meaning. Here's how the Herodians lived. By the way, Christians, Jews, and monotheists are all, Christians, Jews, and Muslims are all monotheists. Is first century Judaisms, like Messianism for the followers of Jesus, were they monotheists or henotheists? Worship one God, but belief in many gods. The middle step between polytheism and monotheism. What did Paul say again? Yeah, Vinny.
I thought that came to an end once after Elijah with the whole burning of, the Baal incident.
On the River Jordan.
That was a turning point from monotheism to monotheism.
It's a lot of people do. It's not really. In fact, monotheism is in the Bible, very rare. Deutero-Isaiah 40 through 55. It's introduced. It starts in Persia. It's a Persian idea. It comes in at that time. Monotheism, very rare. It doesn't really fit in. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. You shall have no other gods before me. Can I have a gods after you? For a while, okay. And then no, not after you either. Okay, no other gods before or after, but there still are other gods, right? Like Yahweh God defends Israel. He's a national God. What about Chemosh? Chemosh defends Moab. And Baal defends the Sidonians. The prophets of Baal were trying to say El, the supreme God, is Baal. And Eliyahu, Elijah, whose name is El, is the supreme God, is Yahweh. His politics is his name. He's saying, no, it's Yahweh. And he won out. He won out. So God works in this mess, folks. You see, all theology is analogy, says St. Thomas Aquinas. I need an analog to think of God. What's an analog for one supreme God that is the only God that exists? One world emperor. Persia had that, right? Because what do you analyze? You understand what I'm saying? So mostly, Vinny, in the Bible, we like to be anachronistic and read our ideas that develop later. I'm not saying I'm a henotheist. I'm not. I'm a Christian. So I'm a monotheist, Trinitarian monotheist. But understand that developed. And so it's the same thing with Islam and Judaism, severe monotheism. Those things developed. What you had before that was henotheism developing towards monotheism. Paul, henotheist. There's only one Lord and one God, but there are other lords and gods. The stars, they're all non-human persons to Paul. Principalities, powers, dominions, thrones. Read the book of Revelation. They're all stars, all constellations in the book of Revelation. We get that wrong too, big time. Moving right along. There's the Hippodrome. See, you can go there and you can bet on the races. It's real good. Okay, we're getting off track here. The High Priesthood. So right underneath the Herodians would be their associates, the high priests. Originally, the high priesthood had been hereditary, but by the time of Jesus' lifetime, first third of the first century Common Era, it had been bought and sold off by the Romans. This means that the religious establishment of the country is, like the Herodians, also in bed with the Romans. And I had a lot more in common with elite Roman society than with anyone living in the Galilee. The high priests of Jesus' lifetime also spoke Greek and never Hebrew. Does that sound like a bunch of Jewish rabbis, Mel Gibson? You got it big time wrong, Mel Gibson. They did mostly know Aramaic and they could read some Hebrew, but were in fact culturally and socially Greco-Romans. So how do you picture Caiaphas? Big beard, right? like a medieval caricature of a medieval Jewish rabbi, anti-Semitic, right? No, not like that. The high priesthood was made up of Sadducees. So they looked and dressed and ate like Greco Romans. In fact, where the Sadducees live, we find pork bones and shellfish all the time. All the time from that era. Next comes the lay aristocracy. See how influenced we are by movies. These are the lay aristocracy are the immediate retainers to the Herodians and the high priests. What families do you think the high priest came from? Who associated with the high priesthood who ran the temple. When most Christians today read about the temple in Jerusalem, they imagine it to have been a religious institution. In fact, it was the central economic and political institution of the culture, controlled entirely by the Herodian family, backed up by the Romans, and run by the lay aristocrats. For example, the temple was the collecting point for all the economic resources in the surround. The worship part of the temple was a relatively small part compared to the enormous warehouses storing the surplus expropriated from the peasantry. All of this was primarily run by these lay aristocrats, of whom we read about often in the New Testament. The lay aristocracy was almost completely comprised of Sadducees, and also would include the higher-ranking military officers. So our model is continuing to form here. All of this makes up the urban elite, the powerful people who lived in Israelite cities, a small portion of the population, and the primary portion of the population that is literate, 2%.
None of them Jewish.
There's nobody here really Jewish. Jewish should be applied to anything 500 Common Era and after. What we mean is Judean.
Okay.
None of them Judean. I mean, they are Judeans in many ways. They're living in Judea, they're living in Jerusalem as elites. But yeah, none of them are, they're not doing the Judean practices held by the peasantry and the lower class members. Following the Torah diet codes, dressing in ways that would be according to the customs as prescribed in Torah. Yeah, Vinny.
Pardon my ignorance, but
No.
in Scripture when it says one of the Roman soldiers says to Jesus, Judean, right?
Judaios, yeah.
And Jesus, King of the Judea.
Which is a huge insult.
It's a huge insult, but for Christ, he was Galilean. His accent was Galilean.
Right on.
So what is that? Is that an error?
No, not at all. In fact, this is you indicate something that is very specific about the way the synoptics and how the word is in flux. So let me clarify that. If you are in Israel, one of the Benim Yisrael, the sons of Israel, you're an Israelite, and you're living in the Roman province called Syro-Palestine, then you will use the term Judean to refer to you living around in Jerusalem or in its surrounding area. If you live in the Transjordan area, then you're a Perean. If you live north of Samaria in the realm of the half-breed, where those Hicks live like Jesus, then you are a Galilean. You use these terms to designate in the house. However, if you are an Israelite or non-Israelite living outside Syro-Palestine, let's say you are a Hellene, like Paul had become, Judean is just a catchword for anybody who lives in the Roman province of Syro-Palestine and who adheres to its customs. Follow? So when Paul says we're neither Judean nor Hellene, he doesn't mean ethnic Jew or ethnic Greek. He means we Israelites. He ain't talking about non-Israelites. We are neither barbarian Israelite or civilized Israelite. Hellene, meaning an Israelite who has appropriated cultural customs outside those belonging to non-Israelite peoples, Greek-speaking peoples, outside of Syro-Palestine. But we don't have time to talk about Paul today. That's another fish for another time. Yeah.
He was also called a Nazarene.
Yeah, because Nazarene refers to the fact he's from Nazareth. That refers to his village. In the first century world of the Bible, if I want to know about somebody, I ask, what's his gender? Jesus, okay? Jesus, he's male. Yeshua's male. Okay? That's the first thing I need to know, because if he's female, okay, wow, don't listen to anything she says. She's dangerous, and they're going to get us all killed. That's why we got to contain them. No, that's how women are, okay? You know, I mean, the Middle East, that way they're perceived, folks. I'm sorry, not me thinking that, oh, let me save myself. Nobody would say women are dangerous at all here. In the Middle East, look at the Bible. Look at the Bible. Samson not only had brawn, he also had brains. Remember I told you one of the ways you should prove you're male in the Middle East is wordplay. Samson could do that. He was brilliant as well as strong. But he was no match for Delilah. The Persian Empire is no match for Esther. She says to her father, hey, I got this. Right? The same thing with Eve. Well, death comes to the world. So women are not hated there. They're feared. Men acknowledge they're going to be defeated by women eventually. All the village women choose, you know, the men choose who the son is going to marry and so forth. They ratify it publicly, but the women arrange it privately, folks. The women rule the private. And they're seen like Dracula. And Dracula's very powerful, but only at certain times. You know, you can't just whatever. I know this. I don't think that's how we should view women, folks. But the fact is, that is how, that's the cultural consensual reality, folks. So understand when you read the Bible, you might think it's hating women. They're not hating women. They're fearing them. Listen to Sirach and the worries of a man, an Israelite, or any Middle Eastern man, how he has to worry about his daughter, lest she not be pregnant when she gets married, lest she get pregnant before she lives with her husband. All of these things bring shame to him, and honor is everything in the Middle East. So, all of these people we've been talking about so far are the urban elite, powerful people in the chimney stack who lived in Israelite cities, a small portion of the population, the primary portion of the population that is literate. They make up 15% of the total population of the city dwellers of the city, but the elite among them make up only a very small slice of that total Israelite population, only 1 to 2%. They would be the elite scribes, some of the Pharisees, not too many actually, but with greater numbers of the Sadducees, comprising an elite that runs city affairs.
They were all appointed?
Oh yeah. Sure. Absolutely.
By the king?
By the king, the tetrarch, the ruler, the puppet of Rome, or by the governor, or the procurator, if it's Pontius Pilate in his time. Yeah, absolutely. They controlled the priesthood and everybody who ran everything in Jerusalem, including the temple. And if we do this, we understand this, what they control and who they dominate, all these people live entirely in the cities, primarily in Jerusalem and Caesarea Maritima down by the coast. That's where Pilate lived. The urban elite controlled the temple, coinage, and writing, and thus wielded tremendous power in this society over everybody else. This means that the vast majority of first century Israelites were much further down the social scale.